Ex-husband unexpectedly reappears in ex-wife's life. Will this be the twist that brings them back together? Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. Sarah Miller had long moved on from her past. It had been 2 years since she and David, her ex-husband, had parted ways. She'd spent those 2 years rebuilding her life, focusing on her career, her health, and finding peace in her own company. Sarah was a woman who valued independence now. The emotional scars from her divorce had healed, or so she thought. She'd built a life she was proud of, filled with routines that brought her comfort. Every day, she woke up early, worked hard at her marketing job, went to the gym, spent time with her friends, and read books. Everything felt settled, calm, predictable. But just when Sarah thought she had it all figured out, her past came knocking on her door in the form of a familiar name. One afternoon, while Sarah was at work, her phone buzzed. It was a notification from her social media account. A message request. David Miller sent you a message. Sarah stared at the screen, the name sending a shockwave through her body. She hadn't heard from David in years. After their bitter divorce, he had disappeared from her life without a trace. Their separation had been hard, but she had convinced herself that it was the right decision. Sarah hadn't expected him to reach out, especially not now, when everything seemed so perfect. Her hands trembled as she opened the message. I need to talk. Can we meet? The message read. It was short, simple, but it carried a weight of urgency she couldn't ignore. Sarah hesitated for a moment. Part of her wanted to ignore it, to pretend that nothing had changed. But deep down, she knew this message was a sign that her life was about to take an unexpected turn. The questions flooded her mind. What did David want? Why now, after all this time? Did he want to reopen old wounds, or was this a chance for closure? Sarah sat at her desk, staring at the screen, trying to make sense of the emotions that swirled inside her. It felt like a moment she couldn't escape, like her past was about to collide with her present in a way she couldn't predict. Would this be the twist that brought them back together? Or was it simply a ghost from her past, trying to stir up feelings she had worked so hard to bury? I know Sarah was hesitant at first. She had 1,000 thoughts racing through her mind. After all these years, why now? Why was David reaching out? Was he just trying to stir up old emotions? But the message was still there, sitting in her inbox, begging for attention. She couldn't just ignore it. After everything they had been through, she had to know what he wanted. The more she thought about it, the more she realized she couldn't just move forward without understanding why her past was suddenly knocking at her door. Taking a deep breath, she typed out a simple reply. Okay. Where and when? Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for a second longer before she pressed send. The anticipation was unbearable. Moments later, her phone buzzed with a response. I'll be at the old cafe by the park at 3 p.m. I hope you can make it. That was all. No explanations, no apologies, just an invitation. Sarah stared at the screen. She hadn't been to that cafe in years. It used to be their place. They had shared countless hours there, talking about everything and nothing at all. It was the place where they had first met, where they had fallen in love, and where they had said goodbye. The memories flooded back to her in waves, and she felt an unexpected tug in her chest. She couldn't explain why, but something told her this wasn't just a casual meeting. It felt like more. Sarah knew she had to go. She needed answers, even if those answers brought up feelings she wasn't ready to confront. The hours before the meeting passed slowly. Sarah tried to focus on her work, but her mind kept drifting. She found herself remembering the small things about their relationship, the way David would smile at her, how he always knew how to make her laugh, even on the worst days. But then there were the darker moments, the arguments, the times when they had drifted apart, when nothing seemed to work anymore. She had left him for a reason, after all. By the time 3 p.m. rolled around, Sarah was on her way to the cafe. The walk felt long, her thoughts tangled in a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. As she approached the familiar cafe, her heart raced. The place was just as she remembered it, cozy, quiet, with the same wooden tables and the smell of freshly brewed coffee. It felt like stepping into the past. Sarah took a deep breath before pushing the door open. The bell above the door jingled, and she immediately spotted David sitting at their old table by the window. He hadn't changed much. His dark hair was shorter now, but his face still held that same familiar look, the one that had once made her fall in love with him. He looked up as she entered, and for a moment, their eyes locked. It was as if no time had passed at all. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. This was real. She was here, facing the man she had once shared her life with. And now, everything was about to change again. The door jingled softly as Sarah stepped inside, her heart racing with each step she took toward the table by the window. She hadn't seen David in years, yet the familiarity of his presence made it feel like no time had passed at all. He stood up as she approached, his face breaking into a smile, though it was tinged with a hint of nervousness. "Sarah," he said, his voice low but steady. "It's good to see you." Sarah nodded, forcing a smile of her own. "It's been a long time, David." They both sat down, the silence between them growing heavier than she had expected. She could feel the weight of everything unsaid, all the years of separation, all the memories that were still fresh in her mind. For a moment, neither of them knew where to start. The awkwardness of it all was undeniable. David seemed to be struggling with his words. Finally, after a deep breath, he spoke again. "I know this is unexpected. I didn't mean to just show up like this. But there's something I need to say." Sarah's eyes narrowed slightly, her curiosity piqued. She wasn't sure what to expect, but the gravity in his voice told her that whatever it wasn't going to be easy to hear. "What is it, David?" she asked, trying to keep her tone neutral. David hesitated, running a hand through his short hair. "I've spent the last couple of years thinking about everything that happened between us. I never really understood why things fell apart the way they did." He paused, looking down at his coffee. "I don't know if I can ever make up for what I did, but I want to try." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. She had expected something, but not this. Not him admitting that he hadn't understood why their marriage ended. She had spent so long convinced that their relationship was irreparable, that it was better to move on, to leave it behind. But hearing David speak like this, it stirred up emotions she had long buried. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "David, we both made mistakes. We both hurt each other. But that was a long time ago. I've moved on." The words felt more final than she intended, and she immediately regretted them. David's eyes softened, but he didn't look away. "I know. I've tried to move on, too. But I couldn't. I've been carrying this guilt with me, and I don't think I can move forward until I get it off my chest." Sarah looked at him, her heart torn between the woman she had become and the memories of the woman she used to be when they were together. "What are you trying to say, David?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. David looked at her, his gaze unwavering. "I miss you, Sarah. I miss us." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected that, not after everything. But the honesty in his words made her pause, made her reconsider everything she thought she knew about moving on. Was there still a chance for them? Or was this just a moment of nostalgia, a fleeting desire to rewrite history? Sarah felt her heart race as David's words hung in the air. She had heard him say he missed her, but the weight of that admission was more than she had expected. For a moment, she didn't know how to respond. Part of her wanted to reach across the table and grab his hand, to tell him that she missed him too. But the other part of her, the one that had worked so hard to move on, told her to stay strong. "David, I don't know what to say." Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of years of pent-up emotions. David seemed to understand. He leaned back in his chair, giving her space, but his eyes never left hers. I know this isn't easy. I never thought it would be. But I had to say it, Sarah. I had to tell you how I feel. She felt a wave of emotions crash over her, anger, sadness, and longing all at once. You hurt me, David, she said, her voice trembling now. I don't know if I can ever forget that. I don't know if I can ever forgive you for what you did. There was silence between them again, but it wasn't the uncomfortable kind. It was the kind that came when two people were finally speaking the truth, however painful it might be. David didn't try to interrupt. He just sat there, his expression softening. I know I can never undo the past, he said quietly. But I want to be better for myself, for you, for us. Sarah could hear the sincerity in his voice, but it wasn't enough to erase the hurt she had felt. It wasn't enough to erase the years of living without him. She had built a life without him, and it wasn't easy. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. I've changed, Sarah, David continued. I've spent these years figuring out who I am, what I want. And I realize now that I want to be someone you can trust again. I want to be someone who deserves you. His words made her pause, made her reflect on everything that had happened. But then, a voice inside her reminded her of the painful memories. The late nights of crying, the empty space next to her in bed, the loneliness that had followed her for so long. I'm not sure I can just pick up where we left off, David, Sarah said, her voice stronger now. I've changed too. I'm not the person I was when we were together. I'm not the woman who would just let you back in without thinking about it. David nodded, understanding. I know, he said softly. I don't expect that from you. I'm just asking for a chance, for us to figure it out. To see if we can make it work, after everything. Sarah took a deep breath, staring at the cup of coffee in front of her. The steam rose gently from the surface, but her mind was in turmoil. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could find a way back to each other. But she was also afraid of being hurt again, afraid of the past repeating itself. After a long moment, Sarah finally looked up at David. I don't know if we can ever go back, but I'm willing to try, if you are. David's face lit up with a small, hopeful smile. I am, Sarah. I really am. But even as the words left his mouth, Sarah couldn't help but wonder, was this the beginning of something new, or just another chapter in a book they'd already closed? Sarah sat back in her chair, her fingers nervously tracing the rim of her coffee cup. The air between her and David was thick with unspoken words. The conversation had shifted, gone from tense to fragile, as if the slightest wrong move could break everything apart. She had just told him she was willing to try again, and yet doubt still gnawed at her. She had spent so much time building her life without him, learning to rely on herself, that the idea of letting someone back in felt like a betrayal to the independence she had worked so hard to cultivate. But then, she looked at David again. The same man she had once loved with all her heart. He looked different yet the same. His eyes held the same depth, the same vulnerability that had drawn her to him years ago. Maybe he was telling the truth. Maybe he really had changed. I don't want to rush into anything, Sarah said finally, her voice soft but firm. I think we both need time. Time to figure out who we are now, what we want. David nodded, understanding, a small but appreciative smile tugging at his lips. I agree. I'm not asking you to make any decisions today. I just wanted you to know that I'm here, and I want to be a part of your life again. Sarah's heart fluttered at his words, but she was cautious. It's going to take time, David. I'm not going to pretend that I can just forget everything that happened. I can't just pick up where we left off. He nodded again, his eyes filled with a quiet understanding. I know. I'm not asking for that. I just want to be there for you, if you'll let me. There was silence between them for a moment, as Sarah considered his words. She had to admit that a part of her still cared for him. That part of her that hadn't let go, that had kept the memories close, even when she pretended to move on. But was it enough? Was it enough to rebuild what they had lost? Maybe, she said slowly, her eyes meeting his. Maybe we can start over. But I need to know that you're not doing this just because you missed the idea of us. I need to know that you're doing this because you've really changed. David looked at her, his expression serious, sincere. I'm not doing this out of nostalgia, Sarah. I'm doing this because I've realized that I want to be a better man. For myself, for you, and for the future we could have. Sarah took a deep breath. The weight of his words settled in her chest, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could start over. But it wouldn't be easy. They would both have to fight for it. For now, though, Sarah didn't have the answers. All she knew was that, for the first time in years, she was open to finding out what could come next. And that was enough for now. As the days passed, Sarah found herself thinking about David more and more. They had agreed to take things slow, to allow time for both of them to adjust to the idea of re-entering each other's lives. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when Sarah felt like she was standing at the edge of a precipice, unsure whether to jump or to walk away. But she knew one thing for sure, she wasn't going to rush into anything. The last time she had rushed, it had ended in heartache. So she took a step back, allowing herself to breathe and think things through. David respected that. He never pressured her. In fact, he seemed to understand her need for space more than anyone else had. They started texting every few days, just simple messages, checking in on each other. He asked about her work, her friends, how she was doing. It was subtle, but it was enough to remind her that he cared. It wasn't the intense passion that had once defined their relationship, but it felt real. It felt like a foundation was being laid, piece by piece, and Sarah appreciated that. She hadn't expected this from David, this patience, this willingness to go at her pace. In the past, when they were together, things had often moved quickly, too quickly. Their love had burned bright, but it had burned out just as fast. This time, she was determined to ensure that wasn't going to happen again. It was a Saturday afternoon when they met again, this time at a small park near Sarah's apartment. They walked side by side, not saying much at first, just enjoying the simple pleasure of each other's company. The weather was perfect, with the sun casting a warm glow over everything, and for the first time in a while, Sarah felt at peace. "I'm glad you agreed to meet," David said after a while, breaking the silence. "I wasn't sure if you would. I know I'm asking a lot, and I don't want to overwhelm you." Sarah smiled softly, looking at him. "I'm glad too. I've been thinking a lot about everything." She paused, trying to find the right words. "I don't know what the future holds, David. I'm not promising anything. But I do know that I'm open to seeing where this goes. One step at a time." David's face lit up, a mix of relief and hope in his eyes. "That's all I'm asking for, Sarah. One step at a time." They continued walking, and for a while they didn't speak at all. It was as if the silence between them was comfortable, filled with understanding. Sarah couldn't deny that there was still something there, something deep within her that responded to David in a way she hadn't expected. It was familiar yet new. It was like learning to trust again, step by step. As they walked through the park, Sarah felt a small flicker of hope. Maybe they could rebuild what had been broken, maybe they could start again, and this time, it would be different. Time would tell, but for now, she was willing to take the chance. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid to see where this path would lead. The days turned into weeks, and Sarah and David continued to take things slow. They had built a routine of sorts, one that allowed them to reconnect, but also gave them the space they needed. Every week, they'd meet at the same park or a quiet cafe, talking about life, about their past, about everything and nothing. Each time they met, the conversation flowed more easily, and the awkwardness that had once filled the air slowly faded. They were getting to know each other again, but this time it felt different. Sarah felt like she was learning more about David than she had during their entire marriage. He had changed in ways she hadn't expected. He was more reflective, more patient, and more willing to listen. It was as if the man sitting across from her now was someone she could respect, someone who had worked hard to understand himself. And yet, despite all the progress, there was still that part of Sarah that held back, that feared repeating the mistakes of the past. She couldn't fully shake the doubts, no matter how many times David reassured her. It wasn't easy, but she was trying. One evening, they found themselves sitting at a small bistro on a quiet street, just the two of them. The rain had started to fall softly outside, the sound of it tapping gently against the windows. It was the kind of evening that felt intimate, the world outside disappearing as they sat together. David reached across the table, his hand resting near hers, but he didn't touch her. Instead, he looked at her, his gaze steady, as if he was waiting for her to say something. "Sarah," he began softly, "I know you're still unsure. And that's okay. I don't expect you to have all the answers right now. But I need you to know that I'm not going anywhere. I want to be here, in whatever way you need me to be." His words hit Sarah like a wave, and for a moment she couldn't speak. She had been holding so much in, trying to protect herself from getting hurt again, but now, sitting across from David, she felt that familiar pull toward him. It was tempting, so tempting to just let go of her fears, to trust again. But could she? Could she really open her heart to him once more? "I don't know if I can," Sarah finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm scared, David. Scared of getting hurt again. Scared of trusting you and then having it all fall apart again." David's expression softened, his eyes filled with understanding. "I know, Sarah. I know. And I'm not asking you to forget everything or to pretend like nothing happened. I just want to show you that I've changed, that I'm not the same person I was before." Sarah looked down at her hands, gathering her thoughts. She felt the weight of the decision she had to make, but in that moment, she realized something important. Maybe she didn't have to have all the answers right now. Maybe she didn't need to know if they could make it work. What mattered was that she was willing to try. Maybe we can try," she said, looking up at him. David smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes, and for the first time in a long time, Sarah felt a glimmer of hope. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was a start. They were taking it one step at a time, and that was enough for now. The road ahead was still uncertain, but Sarah wasn't afraid to walk it with him. Not anymore. It had been a few weeks since Sarah and David had agreed to take things slowly, and the more time they spent together, the more Sarah realized that something was shifting inside her. It wasn't as dramatic as a love rekindled overnight, but it was something. There were moments, small ones, that made her believe they might actually have a chance at rebuilding what had once been. They continued their walks, their talks, and slowly but surely, Sarah felt herself opening up in ways she hadn't expected. She was still cautious, still afraid of making the same mistakes again, but the distance between them that had once seemed so vast was beginning to close. One evening, as the two of them sat on a bench in the park, watching the sunset, David broke the silence. "I've been thinking a lot about us," he said, his voice quiet, almost hesitant. "I know I said I didn't expect anything right away, but I want you to know that I'm all in. Whatever happens, I'm committed to making this work, even if it takes time." Sarah turned her head to look at him. The sincerity in his eyes made her heart beat a little faster. She had always known that David was capable of deep feelings, but seeing him like this, so open and vulnerable, was something she hadn't seen in years. It was as if all the walls he had built up had come down, and for the first time, she saw him as someone she could trust. "I'm not sure what the future holds, David," she said slowly, choosing her words carefully. "But I'm willing to try too. I'm willing to see where this goes." The smile that spread across his face was more than just a relief. It was like a quiet promise that they could figure this out together. They didn't have all the answers yet, and maybe they never would, but in that moment, Sarah felt something she hadn't in a long time: hope. It wasn't a bright, fiery kind of hope, but something gentler, more grounded. A hope that they could rebuild, that they could find their way back to each other, step by step. The next few weeks were filled with small, everyday moments: quiet dinners, shared laughter, long conversations about their past and their dreams for the future. It wasn't perfect, and there were moments when Sarah felt the weight of her own doubts, but there was also something undeniably real between them. They were learning to trust each other again, to let go of the old hurts and mistakes, and to move forward together. Sarah still wasn't sure if they could ever fully erase the past, but she was beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, they didn't have to. As they spent more time together, the connection between them deepened. It wasn't about erasing the past, but about accepting it and moving forward despite it. They were both different people now, changed, yes, but still capable of building something new, something stronger. And that was all they needed for now. A quiet, steady belief that this could be the start of something new. One step at a time. It had been months since Sarah and David had started this journey together, and though the road hadn't always been easy, they were both in a place they had never imagined they could reach. They had faced their doubts, their fears, and their uncertainties, but slowly, they had come to understand that rebuilding their relationship wasn't about erasing the past. It was about accepting it, learning from it, and moving forward together. One evening, as they sat in a small cafe by the park, Sarah felt a sense of calm she hadn't experienced in years. The hustle and bustle of the outside world seemed distant, as if time had slowed just for them. The steady hum of conversation and the gentle clink of coffee cups around them created a peaceful atmosphere. As David reached for her hand across the table, Sarah couldn't help but smile. There was something different about this moment, something simple yet profound. The weight of everything that had come before them felt lighter now, no longer overshadowing their present. "You know," David said softly, his fingers brushing hers, "I've been thinking a lot about where we are now, and I couldn't be more grateful for how far we've come. I didn't know if we'd get here, but I'm glad we're here." Sarah looked into his eyes, feeling the sincerity in his words. "Me too," she replied, her voice steady but full of emotion. "I never thought I could trust again, but with you, it feels different. It feels real." There was a quiet understanding between them, the kind that could only come from shared experiences and growth. They both knew they still had a long way to go, but they were ready to face it together. It wasn't perfect, and it would never be, but it was theirs. For the first time in a long time, Sarah felt truly at peace with the decision she had made. She had once feared that loving David again would open old wounds, but now she understood that healing was a process. It wasn't something that happened overnight, and it wasn't linear. It was messy, it was complicated, but it was worth it. "We're not perfect, David," she said, her voice soft but certain. "But I think we can make this work. One step at a time." David's eyes lit up, and he squeezed her hand gently. "That's all I need, Sarah. One step at a time." And in that moment Sarah realized that the future was no longer something to be afraid of. The future was full of possibilities, full of hope. They had come so far, and there was still so much left to explore. But for now, they were exactly where they needed to be, together. The road ahead may not always be easy, but with each other, Sarah felt confident that they could face whatever came next. And that was enough for her. Together, they were ready for whatever the next chapter would bring.